We are seeing a little bit of an evening off. So within the district, we had an extra 20 families, an extra 4 families that were registered for public housing. But in the region, in the city, we saw a decline of 20. So overall, there's only 16 additional families from the year prior. So there's currently 827 families on the waiting list for public housing. So that showed the first decline in 5 years, which was great. All of the decline was observed in Palmerston North, and this has come off the peak of 729 in the June quarter. So across the country, the number of families on the register increased by 71, so it's still going up. So they're sitting at 24,526 households now awaiting public housing. That's an increase of 3,113 over the year, or 14.6%. So it looks like we might be moving in the right direction. However, one quarter doesn't make a trend, so we'll just be keeping a close eye on that. Next slide, please. So one thing that's very positive at the moment is our near record highs for commodity prices. So as we can see here, dairy prices are sitting at 261.7, which is the highest that we've seen in the last 6 years at least. So that's very positive. And from the GDT auction too, that had a record high on Wednesday of this week, with volumes also incredibly high, with over 31,000 tonnes sold at auction. So that bodes well as we look at the season for 2022, because with the strong prices alongside the high volumes and demand, that suggests a very strong income for our producers in that area. And of course, dairy is our strongest, or our largest primary producer in the region. So dairy farming does actually contribute about 120 million to the regional economy up to the year ended March 2020. So red meat is also doing incredibly well, sitting at 274.8 there for meat, skins and wool, and there's been an upturn in the value of wool as well, which is positive to see. In forestry, we see there was quite strong prices back in May 2021. Although they have softened off, we can say they're still relatively strong. There is some data coming in internationally that suggests there may be further softening, but we'll be keeping a close eye on that data. There is a bit of a glut of stocks in places like India and China, etc. But again, it's been a very strong season for forestry as well. The the Fonterra farm gate prices, as many of you will know, has hit a record too, with them early in the week announcing the farm gate milk price for the season at between $8.40 and $9. Again, very positive. Next slide. So one thing that we can see within the data, both here in New Zealand and internationally, is inflation. So here we have the annual inflation figures, or the CPI for New Zealand households, sitting at 4.9%. And if we look back to 2013, that's very strong. Since the GFC, we've had a low inflation environment. Prior to the GFC, we had a huge amount of supply internationally, so capacity to produce. In the GFC, we had a drop-off of demand with that sustained ability to supply. It's a bit of a reversal this time around. So we've seen a large shock to supply side, but in terms of demand, that still has remained very strong and even increased in areas. And that now that inflation is flowing through to our data. Next slide. So labour costs in New Zealand are also rising off the back of these constrained labour supplies. So the cost of labour was up 2.4. That's strong from New Zealand historically. Public sector labour costs at 1.9. Interesting, private sector labour costs are up quite a bit more at 2.5%. So those constrained labour supplies are really flowing through to the private industries, and they are offering more money basically to secure the labour that they need. Construction sector, of course, an area of great demand, or a sector under great demand at present. So labour costs there have increased the most at 4.1% over the year to September. And the graph there shows how that plays out relative to the last 6-7 years. So a very strong labour price growth there, and completely expected in this type of environment with incredibly strong demand for construction. Next slide. So producer prices and commodity price inflation is a global problem. I'll just refer initially to the the graph on the right-hand side. So this is the latest New Zealand input and output prices for wood and timber. So as we can see there, the producer input prices are up 32.3% over the year, and producer output prices up 24.7%. So the producer input price is basically the price that producers are paying for their input materials, and then the price that producers are receiving at 24.7. So they are still absorbing some of those additional costs and not passing them on, which is interesting in itself. I found this very interesting looking at global commodity data. Now we know that crude oil has gone up substantially. It's flattened off a bit at the moment, but over the year up 43.67. Massive demand for coal, and our own import figures play this out as well. We've had a large increase in the value and the quantity of coal being imported into our country over the last 2 years. That's up 87.9. Lithium batteries for electric cars, incredibly strong, 340 on the back of growing demand for that resource. Coffee, 95. Canola oil, anyone who's tried to get canola oil in the supermarkets in the last 6 months, very difficult, a huge price growth there. Oats, 93%, and the EU carbon permits at 148% over the year. I will note that our prices are up above $68 from $35 a year ago as well, which is a 95% increase. So very strong growth in commodities and also stocks for these products in the market. Next slide. So, of course, all this is flowing through to rising mortgage interest rates. So this time series goes back to March 2008 when we saw a drop-off during the GFC to lower interest rates, which is that lower interest rate environment is what we've enjoyed over the successive years. From this, we can see that there is a slight increase in those mortgage rates, and also the commercial banks are pricing in the expectation of further official cash rate rises in early 22 as well. So some of that has already been considered in these increases. But we are seeing the impacts of that increase now flowing through to those mortgage interest rates. Now, we could say that on a historical perspective, it's still pretty good in terms of those interest rates, and it is, but it is those businesses and households at the margin that are constrained in terms of income, disrupted income, or loss of jobs, etc., or who are highly leveraged, who are most vulnerable to those impacts. So that's something that we will be looking at closely. The banks are becoming quite risk averse in terms of the stress tests on mortgage lending to ensure that consumers can actually manage a couple of basis points or 2 percentage points higher than what they can within their current rates. So hopefully the stability in the financial sector will avoid any kind of issues flowing through or instability in the financial markets from these increasing mortgage rates. Next slide. So in summary, our development and construction investment is incredibly strong and will provide some of the greatest support to the regional economy as we move forward. We know that we have about $8 billion worth of investment that we know of from public and private investment flowing into the region up to 2035. So very positive. There are some constraints in the construction sector that will continue for some time yet. But again, the industry, I think, is working themselves way through that, and we will keep an eye on any impacts from that. Primary sector outlook, and again, very, very positive, and due to our dominance in food production in the area, this will play out and support resilience in 2022 as well. Subject to these inflationary environments, just like everywhere else in the world, we're hoping that potentially there will be some relief in terms of being able to import some of the skilled labour that we need, and some momentum in terms of trained skills and talent. I know that Cedar at the moment has launched a project to attract construction workers here, which we desperately need. The regional economy has proven incredibly resilient over this COVID period, and we've performed very, very well relative to the national average, so that's very promising. And I think because of that, because of the resilience that we have, we will perform very well in the midst of this current environment of increasing costs and rising interest rates. Did you have anything to add to that, Peter?
Just some commentary on the impact of the slowing in house price growth, or even flattening off. Will have an impact on consumer demand, but the area we see that will impact most is car purchases. In the last year, up to September, the value of car imports increased by 54% on a year ago. So that's people's house value go up, and them going to the bank and borrowing to buy a new car. So that won't have a lot of impact on the economy if that spending, apart from the car firms, but for the general economy, it won't have a major impact.
The wealth impact, isn't it, of rising house prices? Great, thank you. Any questions?
Excellent, thank you, Peter and Stacey, as usual. Questions from the team? Councillor Marsh.
Stacey and Peter, thank you for that report. Very informative, both in the printed one on our council files and there today. A question, please. At the end of the last lockdown, we saw quite a shift from our consumer spending debt to focus on mortgage debt. Is that happening again this time? Have you seen that, or is the mortgage debt lift and interest rates stop that?
The RBNZ does hold data for the country, and you're right, Councillor Marsh, we did see that that deleveraging of credit card debt, etc. at that time. To be completely honest with you, I haven't had a look in the last couple of months, but I will do so and bring that information back, unless you've had a look, Peter, to see what the most recent impacts are.
No, I haven't had a chance to look at that.
Okay, and then the next question, which was in our papers for today, just a little bit more commentary around the traffic flows and how we can convert the huge jump in our percentage lift of traffic into a monetary figure from NZTA. Would be an interesting one to have some correspondence around.
That huge lift, because that's an annual average, is really a return to more normal levels after the sort of the 7-week period in level 4 and level 3 in the first half of last year. So, you know, the COVID lockdowns have made quite a mess of the data over the last couple of years, and will continue to make it hard to sort of see the trend until the lockdowns begin to settle down.
Yeah. Having said that, we're 6% ahead of the national average, so I would like to think that we might be able to receive a little bit more funding from NZTA. I'll leave that with both mayors. It's coming later.
A question I have, just a general one around the increase in factories and industrial buildings, the proportion of the non-residential consents. Do we know much about the breakdown of that? How many of those relate to new businesses coming to the region, and just as exciting, businesses that are expanding?
I produce a summary, but I don't actually have it in front of me, of all the major consents. But even in November, there were, I think, 3 new sort of warehousing type ones, but I don't know, because the detail isn't necessarily on the consent, whether it's a new business or just one expanding. And of course, then someone often moves into the premises that they're moving out of.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, Mayor Helen, that 28 million of our consents are for Ohakia, but we also have a greater proportion than usual of commercial industrial investment, and I'll get that detail for you. I do have that detail.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Mayor Grant.
Yeah, thank you. If we're in comments time, that's great. Look, we received this more city-specific data yesterday at our economic development meeting, but it's good to have a wider regional lens on it. And I think it just shows the real value of our diverse economy in all the different sectors, and backed up by those really buoyant primary commodity prices. It's really quite good news. But there are some headwinds coming, and I think Peter signalled on those, and so did Stacey, with sort of interest rates, inflation. We have lost that housing affordability, although we are still affordable by national rates. It's still very unaffordable for the majority of our residents. And the labour constraints and supply chain issues, they're all there. If anybody buys a car, you won't get it for about 3 or 4 months. So we know there are supply chain issues. I think those strong stats overall, I can't recall where we've had building consents up, lowest unemployment ever, population growth, although it's sustainable, retail spends up, visitor numbers up, and even wool is up. I think that's a first that I've seen in all together. But the most pleasing stat, I think, would have to be the total earnings or value of jobs, and that $4 billion worth, which Peter alluded to. That's a 6.3% increase. So that means people are actually getting more to take home. And I think that's, you can spin some numbers with the amount of jobs, but it's actually the value of the jobs, which is really important. So I think this the region's economy is, as Stacey said, is really resilient. I think we're well placed to combat those headwinds, and they are coming. And I think we will be affected by the slowness and sluggishness of Auckland coming out of lockdown. But we are well placed. And of course, we're in the middle of the largest infrastructure spend for the region and the city in the last 30 years. So good signs. Just want to acknowledge the authors, Peter and Stacey, well done. And I hope the media pick up on it and publish some good news for once. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe both our comms team, we could put together a joint statement following today's meeting, get it out to the media. Councillor Belsky, you had your hand up. Just unmute yourself, Steve.
Yeah, I'm just in the agenda on annual business and employment report on 4.3. It says the 3-year business survival rate in the region has improved from 55.7 etc. to 56.2. Is that nearly 50% of our new businesses don't survive after 3 years?
Yep.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Goodness me, that's a lot, isn't it?
And I would imagine, Stacey, you can correct me, that is actually quite a good step for us, for the norm. Would that be right, Stacey?
I believe so, but I think Peter's more of an expert on this, but I believe it is positive. Peter?
It's important to recognise that what we think of businesses when we look at those numbers doesn't necessarily match with what the numbers count. So everyone who sets themselves up as self-employed, so a truck driver that has to buy his truck and run it independently, or someone works in a hairdressing salon, the employer doesn't want to pay the minimum wage, so they're actually a contractor. All of those get counted as businesses. You've also got rental property owners in there as well. So there is quite high turnover in some of those sectors. There's even people at home trading cryptocurrency and that. But so we do actually have that broken down by sector, and there is quite a range of sort of survival rates across those different sectors.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you. Councillor Hunter.
Thanks, me, Helen. I was going to say the same thing as Grant about communication, so it's already been said. So I actually lowered my hand. Thank you, Meg, Helen.
Great, thank you. Anything further from anyone? Yeah, I just want to echo Mayor Grant's comments. It's a really good result considering where we're at in our economy, but as Grant said, who knows what's ahead of us, and we know there are some challenges going to hit us, let alone what COVID might do for us and the impact from that. So thank you again to Stacey and Peter for your ongoing great work in bringing us all of this data, and the stuff that goes behind the data is key to it. So thank you again. There is a recommendation on page 9. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Mayor Grant. And a seconder is Councillor Harpiter. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. And again, well done to everybody. Right, the second part of our officers' report on page 51 is our Cedar statement of expectations. So welcome to the team from Cedar. See you there joining us. and Robbie's here today, and Robbie, and Malcolm. Who else have I missed?
We've got David right now.
Thank you, and David's there as well. So I will hand that over to you. We have that document. Take it as read, but please highlights and then any discussion. So David and Michael from the councils, do you want to lead this off and then Cedar can comment?
Yes, certainly. And David, just chip in when you need to, okay?
Yeah.
So last year we made a significant change around the statement of expectations with modifications to funding from Palmerston North City Council and enhanced focus on a number of strategies and initiatives for Cedar. This year with new chief executive coming in, changes coming up for the board. This is a statement of expectations, which is signalling to Cedar a continuation and a growth of what they've already got in place. So that's the nature of that. David, would you like to add anything to that?
No, Michael, that was the only point I was going to make, just emphasising that continuation of the statement of expectations at paragraph 1.3. I was also just going to briefly note, I recall last year as part of the statement of expectations or statement of intent, there was some discussion about an indicator regarding the size of the economy relative to the tonnes of carbon. So there was some investigations done on that. Obviously, we have data on the size of the economy and GDP. The city has annual carbon emissions data. However, I just have to check in with Stacey regarding the district's emissions. I'm not sure there was a regular annual sort of set of data for the district's carbon emissions. So if you were looking at adding an indicator regarding the size, or if the councils were looking at adding an indicator regarding the size of the economy relative to carbon emissions, there is city data. I'm just not sure whether there's district data. So.
If I can comment, we don't have that as yet, but it's certainly something that we're looking into. And I think it is important to have that context around our economy and be able to monitor it over time. So we'll be investigating that over the next few months. And I will be in contact with Adam Jarvis from Palmerston North City Council to see if there is any opportunities to invest in the same type of process that you have there at the city.
Thank you. David, is there anything further from the city you want to add or highlight?
No, nothing further from me. Just those 2 points.
Excellent. Okay, let's pass it over to Cedar. Is there any comments there and the fact that rolling it over, but more importantly about, well, if we've had an update on progress on some of those activities, but more about comment about where that's likely to lead to over the next year?
Well, thank you, Mayor Helen. I think the key thing here is the continuity, and I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to, so maybe if we just go straight to specific questions, I'm happy to answer those.
Okay, excellent. Right. Questions, comments from around the team. Councillor Hadfield.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just reading the letter to Malcolm on December 21. The shareholders identified strategic partners for Cedar. And given that on the next page we refer to specific joint priorities of MPC and PNCC, is food and fibre strategy and the value chain from primary production to farmers and growers agribusiness, is that we perhaps would consider FEDS. Malcolm might not agree, but we would consider perhaps FEDS should be the strategic partner.
Well, we're certainly working on the strategy, which has been rebranded to a food and beverage strategy to better align with the central government industry transformation plan. In terms of the work doing there, we're of course we are talking to people within Federated Farmers, but I guess we're in your hands if you feel that we should have a stronger link with that organisation. That's fine, I guess. We do pick up Federated Farmers as part of the Manawatu Chamber, because they are part of that grouping as well. So, yeah, I guess over to you on that one.
Could I just comment there? Sorry, Madam Chair, through you, Madam Chair, sorry, those partners on page 54 or the first page of the letter are sort of the headline strategic partners, and I would expect there would be a long list of stakeholders that would be engaged through the development of the food and fibre strategy and for instance, the implementation of the Central New Zealand Distribution Hub strategy. So I think if we start listing all the stakeholders we work with as strategic partners, it will become a very long list.
Yeah, good point. Any further comment? Mayor Grant.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that's a good point what the councillor's brought up. But there are, if you look at, I think we cover it in a catch-all with central government agencies and as Mr. Murphy said, we've got, and I know Malcolm's been working with MPI. There's strong links into MPI. You got Fed Farmers, you've got Dairy New Zealand, you've got New Zealand Forestry Association. I mean, there's quite a few. Red meat grouping, you've got quite a few that could come into that. But I do think it's not lost on the food and fibre strategy, and those individual organisations will come to the fore. So I think there's a catch-all there that's already linked.
I guess the other issue is that while your intention is to show the diversity of who our partners are, inevitably you will leave somebody out, which we don't want to do. Right, any other questions or comments from anyone? Councillor Harper.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Helen. Just on the letter, just where it's got domestic visitation and it's got due to the impacts of COVID-19, I just wonder if that's a little bit limiting, because we don't know what else is going to be after COVID-19. What is the next virus that's going to come in? So I wonder if it could be a catch-all there due to the impacts of COVID-19 and anything else. Because what is going to be around the corner? Who knows what's going to be around the corner? We don't know, because just the bracket closes there, and who knows what's going to be around the corner? Who's got the crystal ball to say what's going to be around the corner?
Yeah, Michael, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, we could just delete that bit and just, you've got domestic visitation and that covers it. So.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Agreed.
That's a good point to pick up, because who knows what's around the corner. Councillor Ford.
Just perhaps a request from Malcolm. I'm aware that the focus has changed from food and fibre to food and beverage. Could you perhaps just give us a little bit more of the background as to why? I know it relates to government and government funding, etc. But I just think that this is perhaps reasonably new information for a number of people around the table.
Okay, this isn't a straightforward situation, because a lot of people do refer to food and fibre when it comes to primary sector industries. When we're looking at fibre, that of course brings in wool, which is an important commodity in the sector. It also can pick up wood fibre, which is a growing industry for us in this region based on intentions to invest. But we really felt that aligning with the central government wording was important, because the food and beverage industry transformation plan is currently being stood up, if that's the right phrase, in Wellington. So it's really appropriate, we feel, to align with that approach. And it's easy to make arguments the other way, of course, so I accept that.
Thank you. Anything further there? Otherwise, if we go back to page 51, and I'm assuming that we will change the signatories to this document to make them to current personnel. Okay. So if we go back to page 51, there is a recommendation there.
Also move.
Thank you. Moved Councillor Marsh, seconded Councillor Ford. Is there any further discussion? Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Against? Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you. So just in doing that, while we've got Cedar with us here, I just want to take the opportunity, given that this will be Malcolm Bailey's last meeting with us as the chair of Cedar. And so I just want to formally record our thanks to you, Malcolm, for all the commitment and the passion in which you've given this role. You know, it's been a difficult task pulling together a new organisation. There was a few bumps along the way, hiccups in getting it up and running, and then we've had discussions along the way. But I think we're now in a really good space. We've really identified what the key things are that we want to achieve and see happen, and that gives a much clearer direction to Cedar, to the whole team, about what we're looking for. So just again, thank you so much. I know we're not losing you completely. You're helping us out on the food and beverage strategy, which is fantastic, and being able to access all of those great connections that you have throughout the country and overseas. So I just want to, on behalf of the joint committee, thank you for your work that you've done at Cedar, and wish you all the best for the future. Mayor Grant.
Yeah, kia ora, thanks, Mayor Helen. Look, I just want to repeat our thanks from the city to you, Malcolm. I note you've got a Sarah Platt painting behind you on the Zoom there, and of course, for those on this call or on this meeting call, the city and the district gifted Malcolm a Sarah Platt painting of the city and of Feilding Township, and I know he was quite chuffed, and I know why now, because he's got his own farm painted at the back of him there. But anyway, on a serious note, thank you, Malcolm, for your service to Cedar. As Helen has alluded to, we won't lose you, because you'll be working tirelessly for us, and probably very underpaid on the food strategy, and we look forward to that coming forward. I just also want to acknowledge you for your investment in the district, especially in the city. You are one of the bigger private investors in business in our city, and I know you keep a pretty low profile in that space, but on behalf of the city, thank you for what you're doing, and it is very much acknowledged. Kia ora.
Well, thank you, Mayor Grant and Mayor Helen. I really appreciate those comments. And as you say, I'm not going anywhere fast. I'm a very proud member of this community, which I, wrap Palmerston North City and Manawatu District together. So I'm going to carry on doing what I'm doing, and I'm really pleased to be part of the food strategy. And, I think we're in good shape for Cedar to kick on going forward. So I'm here to help, and very happy to do so going forward. So again, thank you for your comments, much appreciated.
Great, thank you. Now, I did see a couple of hands go up. Councillor Barrett and Councillor Butt, were they hands or are they now gone?
They were applause.
They were applause, well done. Councillor Harper.
Hi, I just wanted to say, thanks, Mayor Helen. I just wanted to say, Malcolm, also thank you for what you have done for Cedar Board. And it has had some ups and downs, particularly with members that have come and gone, but thank you for pulling it all together. But also what you've done with Gravel and Tar. You have been behind the scenes on that, but thank you for what you have put into Gravel and Tar. It's been a great bike race, and you have put a lot into it. So we do appreciate all that you have put into the Gravel and Tar race. So thank you for that, Malcolm, and thank you from the city for that.
Great. And the other thank you, I'm taking it, David, that this is your last Cedar meeting as the interim CE, is that correct?
Absolutely, you are correct there, Mayor Helen, and equally it's been a pleasure to be back up here on this cameo role again, assisting with the economic development of the region. So the permanent CE, Jerry Stearman, starts on the 10th of January.
Awesome. So again, we want to thank you collectively for picking up the role, and you came in at a time when it needed to come together and get some consistency about where we were going for the future. So I thank you for that, and for the work that you've done with the Cedar team. It's been a rough time for them. You know, we've had to make some decisions politically, but also the environment they're working in with COVID and everything else. So thank you, and if you could pass that on to the team at Cedar, it would be much appreciated. And we look forward, no doubt you'll pop up somewhere else.
Absolutely, and I'll certainly pass on to the team, and I know they will appreciate those words.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you to all of the team, the board members of Cedar, for your joining us today, but also the work that you've done over the past year. And we will catch up again soon. Thank you so much. Okay, right. We've got no late items today, but we do have a discussion. Now, Mayor Grant and I thought this was a really good opportunity, being the last one for the year, to have a bit of discussion about where do we want the Joint Strategic Planning Committee to go, particularly in the next year. And we put in the terms of reference there for you to just refresh what why this committee was set up, what its terms of reference are, which are actually quite wide. And the thinking was, do we actually use this opportunity to come together? And it was highlighted by our team here that this is one of the very few opportunities that elected members from both councils have the opportunity to get together. Mayors meet at regular opportunities, and it was felt that maybe we could set a direction for this committee to just to use that opportunity better than we currently are. And so it's on the table for discussion. Mayor Grant, did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, just a couple of things. First of all, I suppose this hasn't gone back to our council, so I'm only speaking from sort of a personal perspective, but it does seem a little bit of a waste at times that we just seem to focus around Cedar, but we do have some other services that and occasionally we talk about some shared library stuff and that sort of thing at different times. But we do share building services. There's a call, you've seen what the Canterbury Mayoral Forum have done, where they've pulled all their building guys together across, I think it's about 6 councils. I think there's an opportunity to have a greater discussion about what we do there, not just with MDC and PNCC, but perhaps, a Build Central, where those are some things which are pretty standard right across the board. And it's also quite a challenging time for building services teams right around the country. I personally think too that this is a wider discussion than just MDC. We have grown a lot closer to the south with Horowhenua, and we're seeing with transportation connections, with rail connections, we do a lot with them as well. I think it would be great if we could not, in some way, this would have to be done at a triennium because it needs to go through ratification of both councils, but whether this strategic committee actually includes another council or 2.
Thank you. Yes, I would endorse that. And, from an economic point of view, we're doing, there's good work going on supporting Rangitikei and some of the economic growth that they've got there as well. So potentially that's another one. We talked at regional chiefs yesterday about the potential collaboration around housing, around the wider region, and whether there's a smarter way to do that to achieve what we're all wanting to do and what the government's trying to achieve. So there's certainly some merit in it. Mayor Grant's right, it hasn't gone to individual councils as yet. It is just a discussion, but I'd like to open it up for any comments that we could then take further. Councillor Rutherford.
Thank you, Mayor Helen. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Thanks for bringing this forward, and to Mayor Grant for bringing this forward as well. I know he's been talking about it a wee bit too. So I probably should have swapped notes with him first. I agree that there's an opportunity to re-look at how we operate moving forward, and I think that it would be really good to put the feelers out to Horowhenua and Tararua to see whether we could actually take a wider lens on strategic direction, especially where there's opportunities to work together. It seems as well that this is the move of the government, particularly in recent times, that I don't think they're necessarily moving towards things like amalgamation, but I certainly think they're saying actually people should be working together where there are opportunities to do that. And we've seen that with roading and waters and other discussion points over the last term. So it would be good to, I guess, engage with them kind of now-ish or moving into the new year, so that if we were to look at something wider and look at what pieces of work could come through, you've suggested things like housing and the like, that actually that would be aligned and ready for the next triennium, because that would be a start date. But obviously we know that work and those conversations have to happen much earlier, particularly when you're setting up joint agreements and committees and those sorts of things. So I do agree with taking a regional approach and scaling up. I would just say as well, besides the Cedar reporting, which has got a really clear mandate to come through to this committee, other opportunities that have, sorry, there's like very loud vehicles driving past the council right now, so we can hear the music in the background. There's been other opportunities that we've looked at, things like the opportunities for libraries and shared services, but I mean, I haven't heard any updates since that came through over a year ago now. So I would just say as well that when we do have opportunities for anything shared, that actually we kind of keep some good oversight over them and not let them fizzle out, because there is a great opportunity to work together, but we want to make sure that we've sort of got a bit of teeth to be able to do that. So yeah, but I would absolutely support some early conversations and seeing where we could take this.
Thank you so much, Councillor Harberton.
Thanks, Mayor Helen. Just thinking along the lines of Accelerate 25 and seeing where that group fits into this, because it's another group that looks at economic development and it looks at our whole Horizons region. And I sort of think that if we're looking at this, we might as well look at that from that region as well. So I'm thinking of opening up that can of worms as well. If we're looking at this, we might as well look at that from that point of view as well. So that would be my train of thought, and that's where I'd probably want to look at this as well. So if we were opening this up for the next triennium, I'd probably want to look at it from that point of view as well, to open it up from there, because that is economic development too. So I'd want to add that into the mix as well. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you. David.
Yeah, just a couple of I guess pieces of officer advice. So the first thing is that the terms of reference for the Joint Strategic Planning Committee are actually quite broad in relation to activities of strategic issues affecting PNCC and MDC. So while Cedar tends to dominate the agenda, the terms of reference are quite broad. So I think there is some scope there. Certainly, if it was to include other councils, that would require a bit of a rethink. And I just in terms, I guess an update or heads up for the PNCC councillors, there is a report coming to the 20th of December council meeting that responds to the resolution passed about 12 months ago regarding the review of the shareholding arrangements for Cedar. And that report will include some commentary around the sorts of issues that are being discussed today.
Excellent, thank you. Mayor Grant.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think, look, David sort of nailed it in the sense that we can do things. And as Deputy Mayor Rutherford said, it's good to start having this discussion now in readiness for the new triennium. And who knows who will be around the table, but we should be setting a good platform going forward. Rangitikei obviously has, we don't have as much to do with Rangitikei, but they're a lot closer to you, obviously. And I do know that you've got some shared services with them in terms of roading. But look, the likes of those closer TA neighbours are helpful. But there are some things that we can do almost immediately. I like Councillor Hapata's idea about Accelerate 25 having more visibility with this, and I don't see any harm why Cedar and then slash the wider region, Accelerate 25, could not be giving us some sort of regular update, maybe every 6 months. Also, if we did have the likes of Rangitikei and Horowhenua involved in some form, that makes Cedar a lot more attractive to them as a more wider agency. So there is maybe a method to what we're doing. Housing's a must. We've got to get together on these housing, and even if it's just understanding what's been consented. I know the officers do talk from time to time, but this would just make it a little bit more strategic and transparent. Things like the environment services, dog control, we're not that dissimilar in what we do, certainly in the urban areas of Fielding and possibly some of the other villages. I know it's quite different in the rural sector around dog control, but we should be doing some stuff together there as well. So I'd like to think that we go back to individual councils, circulate some ideas, get them back through the CEs and our GMs, try and get something on paper that comes to our next meeting that tries to give it a little bit more of an agenda items. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Ford.
Thank you. I'd certainly endorse all the comments that have been made. I think Palmerston North, Manawa 2, Horowhenua, Rangitikei is important to us, as has just been mentioned. We have a lot of communities of interest with Rangitikei, and of course the shared services, which are roading and Three Waters, which we don't intend losing anytime soon. That was tongue in cheek, by the way.
Statement of fact.
But when we work together, as we've seen many times before, we get taken very seriously, particularly at central government level, and I think that should be at the back of our thinking. So I'm all for sharing, or for exploring opportunities and what we can do together. And I do think I'm certainly open to widening the mandate for Cedar as well. Let's have a look where A25 might fit in. So yeah, all in favour of let's have a good look at it.
Great, thank you. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mayor Helen. Certainly endorse the commentary so far, particularly around the geographic scope. In terms of the sort of focus area scope, I just think the simplest thing to do would be to set it around the well-beings and include future for local government. And that would set us well for the next term. I think making it as broad as possible is actually the way to start. And then, the housing and all those specific examples can be addressed through that broader lens, thinking about all the well-beings that they address.
Thank you. Councillor Batts.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Helen. Being the first term councillor, I'm not sure whether we do something at the end of every 3 years about this committee, a kind of a wrap up or performance review. So I was thinking probably a new assignment for Peter and Stacey, that if we could do something to show these new the partners we are thinking about, to invite them, if we could do a review of the last 3 years, that what we have achieved or what we have gained from this committee, I think that will be a good idea to attract them or to invite them.
Excellent. They're all good, really good comments, and so they've been noted, and taking their grants recommendation that we ask our CEs to take those back to both councils, have a discussion with our own teams, and then bring that back to our next meeting for a wider discussion. So thank you for considering that today, and it's just got the ball rolling on this discussion, so I appreciate it. Okay, the notification of items for our next meeting, well, I guess we've just covered a very key one. Are there any other items that you can think of at the moment that we should tag for the agenda next time? There will be an opportunity with an email go out to elected members to nearer the time for the agenda. So otherwise we move to item 11, which is public excluded, and I'm happy to move that the publicly excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of this meeting, namely the confirmation of minutes and the appointment of chair and independent directors for Cedar. Seconded by Councillor Ford. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you. Against? The motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Robbie. You too.